So Tom, obviously the three of us worked together for 15 years out of the Future Laboratories 20. So, we shared that journey and that change. But, if you think back 20 years when we were starting out and you were also starting out in your journey into the future, how do you think that the world of trend and trend forecasting and foresight has changed over the last 20 years? What are your thoughts and reflections on that?
Well, you know me very well, so I like a structure. So I prepared a little structure. So I think back in, what was it? 1998, 99, 2000, WGSN was a startup. It was all sort of, I think the word I was thinking of was something like, it was speculative foresight. It was intuiting lifestyle, fashion, cultural trends, but it was mainly used to inspire design and communications. It was very much sort of, it was about energy and forces and feelings, And then, as you guys rightly know, when the Future Laboratory began, it was, very much around social foresight. It was predicting consumer market trends to inform and inspire brands. But it was about innovation. It was about doing something with that foresight and creating a sort of a social buzz. And I remember our early days, the PR kind of work we used to do, which we still do. Mm-hmm. And then it moved to strategic foresight. And that was where I think the world got difficult and even more difficult. And it was about forecasting almost future operating environments. So if you're a business, how the hell are you going to run your company? So especially after 2008. So I think those sort of three waves, from speculative to social to strategic foresight, it definitely was a shift in the feeling, the methods, the intensity, the joy. I think has changed. What is the joy of doing this again? Because it's a lot more serious now. So I think it has evolved, and I think as we know that the market has exploded. You guys were one of the first pioneers in this industry. But it was an unknown thing, and then it became a science. It did become a methodology. It has changed a lot.
Well, so that perfectly segues into the next question. So what next? You've very neatly put 3 S's in there.
Yeah.
What's the fourth? What's next after strategic foresight?
Well, I think the three of us have definitely had these musings at 11 o'clock at night on many an evening where we thought something's missing. And I think that the next step is systemic foresight. And this is where it takes the prowess and the professionalism, but also the power of something like foresight, and really starts to say, how do we foresee the intervention points in living systems, and then go to work on transformation. And I think that asks a lot of people using foresight. So it used to be, here's the foresight, goodbye, versus we're not going anywhere, we need to use this. So I think this shift from sapere aude to, which is dare to know, as you know, the motto of Future Laboratory, to agere aude, which is dare to act. And I think that shift of going from conducting an orchestra to actually curating something properly is immersive, from having a monologue to very much a trialogue, which is a term you've often used, from broadcasting to guiding, and from magic and the wonder of theatre to keeping that, but making sure that it has meaning. And I think from gurus to citizens, and from talking to acting. So there's a lot of, I think, not just doing it for the sake of doing it, but doing it because it's going to create change.
Yeah, I think you're so right. I mean, and
absolutely.
Really, I mean, it's what you've neatly kind of transposed there is, the conversations that we were having around this shift from the experience economy to the transformation economy. And it is the fact that it's about this far more proactive sense of where change needs to happen and what that change needs to actually invoke or evoke, that it is systemic, that it is about changing systems. It's about changing not just a philosophy or an experience, but a way of life and a way of doing things. And I think that's very profound, and it's probably going to keep us all very busy for another 10 years.
I think so. And I think, you've rightly, coined the phrase the transformative 20s, because it is really hard at the moment, and we all know that. And I think it requires some new tools. So I think being able to think in systems is not easy, and to be able to actually codify knowledge and make it not sensible, but make sense of it. Understanding what impact really is, and if you have foresight, how do you almost measure return on foresight, or ROF? And I think diversity is a sacred power. You know, how do we make sure that the diverse perspectives are going into the conversations at the beginning, which I know, Martin, and you've talked about in the past as well. So there's a lot of, I think, tricks that are missing still. And obviously there's technology. So how do we put the right tools into the hands of human foresight capabilities to make sure that humans can really feel like they're able to foresee properly? Because, you know, whether you're a leader or a CEO or a citizen, I think being able to look around the corner is even more important now.
To do. I mean, one of the things that I would kind of not argue, but I'm slightly fearful of, is that particularly with CEOs and you know, leadership management teams, is they're going to try to get the ship back onto the same course, because that's obviously
it's what they do,
and B, where, you know, there's potential profit to, you know, just to get it back to where it was. And I kind of fear, well, the new normal, if it's as bad as the old normal with a twist, is just pointless. So the question is, how do you persuade leaders and business people that they should be now setting a completely different course anyway? This is the opportunity, and you're there to give them the tools. Because I know that with your new business, part of that is equipping them with the tools so that they can get on and do it. What's your kind of a reading of the market and your hesitancies about their abilities? What are you seeing that maybe that business needs to think about before it can even kind of get on with this new journey? What are the factors that you think maybe they're not ready for it? Or
I think embracing unfortunately, I think a lot of people who realize what transformation is they've had something happen to them. I think it's you know, from speaking to over 200 coaches this year, this has been almost the result, is the real transformation happens when the people go, I understand that I need to change. And you can't make that happen. You can't inspire them to do that. I think it has to happen, unfortunately. And what happens is you get this situation where they are innately vulnerable and positively vulnerable, and then that all of a sudden they see the light and they see transformation. And it's earlier in March, I was talking to one client, and they said, not right now because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I said, well, the analogy is let's zip ourselves up in a tent and let the storm pass, and it's not going to pass. And after 3 days, we're going to run out of food. So you're going to have to go out into the storm and be brave. So I think it's demanding an awful lot of people who are in leadership positions. Your point, Chris, about being a CEO, I would not want to be a CEO right now, who is the steward trying to keep everyone going. I think it requires CEOs or leaders to embrace being almost like a Sherpa mixed with a gardener. I think knowing that a garden will overgrow, you need to prune it back, you need to reduce it down, and it will blossom again. But at the same time, dictate what you want it to look like. You need to lead into the storm.
Shape.
And it's not for the faint-hearted. I think, you know, I was talking to one client the other day, and they said, what will it take? And I said, you're going to have to stop so many things if you want to properly reset. And then that affects lots of things in terms of shareholder and all sorts of things. So I think the winners are going to be the ones that are really brave, that understand human needs, who have the ability to think in systems, which is not easy, and then ultimately gamble and take a risk. And that's the chance that I think some sectors will have, and other sectors will be reborn. You know, that they will, like fashion, for example, they will be reborn.
A question that has come up, which I find fascinating, and you're slightly touching on it here, is, you know what, where you've got CEOs who they have this massive infrastructure, they have these kind of, you know, long-term leases on buildings and that, and they're one of the focuses I've been reading, particularly, you look at France, what's happening in the US, is this need to get people back to the office. So the focus is getting them back and making that return comfortable. And my question is the why. I'm curious about your thinking on why do people need to go back to the office, and also, I guess, what is the why? The real reason we don't need to go back now to be productive. We don't need to go back to occupy a desk or whatever. What do you think is the why, if there is a why, to get people back into buildings? Because the CEO would be asked this, and I kind of think none of them have the answer. They're not really thinking about the realities of the why. They're thinking about the what, which is, what I need to do to get them back in, because that's what we occupy a building, which of course isn't a function of a business. That's a utility of a business. It's not really the raison d'etre you set up a business to occupy a building.
Yes.
But that seems to be a lot of CEOs are mistaking that value.
Yes. No, I think it's about comfort. So if you think about the psychological zones of comfort, fear, learning and growing, and a lot of people have had to learn and grow because of resource scarcity, i.e., how do I get my shopping, or how do I survive? What's going on? I think CEOs or people who have enjoyed the benefits and the culture of having a busy office before the pandemic, and that was very much why they turned up every day themselves. Not to call out generations, but there are certainly some generations who think that's what business is. When they had the work from anywhere normality hit them, a lot of them had never had that before, and a lot of them had never really thought that that was allowed or permitted. The kind of callback, or the idea of business as usual is about getting people back into organization. I think it's going to shift from, with Microsoft announcing that the entire workforce is going to work from anywhere forever. I think that sort of normality shift is going from, all the trends around workforce, and then there was the trends around workplace, and now it's the trends towards work habitats. And if you have a work habitat understanding, which is wherever you are, digital, that is, you're going to have to embrace that. I think it's about the fact that I think leaders want, or humans want, some return to normality. As a parent, for me, it was my kids going back to school was a big normality check of, okay, some sense of what it used to be like. And I think if you're a leader who loves business culture and loves the moment where everyone's buzzing in the office, they want that comfort back again.
Yes.
As we all know, and I'm sure absolutely as business owners, that a lot of people are saying, but I'm actually really productive and I like walking in the park and doing Zoom calls or whatever it might be. And that flexibility isn't new. It's just, how do you deal with the ultimate reason for having a business, which is well-being and wellness of your staff. And that might not be within four walls.
Yeah, I think that's a question.
But we know it works. We know that it's important. So
interesting. And I agree. And also, it's what's the benefits of these things. And there is, because I'm curious with your business going forward, I think a lot of those things will start coming to the front, where previously it would have been a structural issue, would have been a question about, performance, profit. But I think there's going to be a massive re-examination of well-being, the culture, the notion of health, not just of the business, but of people. And then also how that's a core value of profit, where previously it was an added value. You when you did okay, you put a gym into the building, and that's it. Nobody ever used it anyway. But I think it's going to be interesting. What do you think, from your point of view, will be the big questions that, with putting on your new hat? You've kind of come from foresight, and you're now on a different journey. What do you think of the question? If you were a CEO in those companies, what should they be asking you?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, well, so with Avancera, the remit is to make everything regenerative, which is a really awful word. So, trying to find another one, but it means bring new and vigorous life to people, planet, and So the space I'm moving into is, I'm up the top of the mountain going, why don't we try and get up here? Because if you get to the top of Mount Regenerative, everything will be much, much better. Now, I'm currently at base camp, to use the analogy. doing fitness tests, and people are going, I'm going, there's no way you're going to be able to make it up.
Yeah.
So the question I'm getting is, what does it take to wear that $15,000 North Face jacket? Because I want to look really good in it. And that's the problem, is that they want to put on the regenerative coat,
but not do the business,
but not really understand what it takes. And a lot of it is, for example, lexicon, actually looking at the definition of the word profit and model and purpose, liability, the boring stuff, and saying it is going to have to be renamed or redefined.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest things is this post-growth. What does growth mean? What does purpose mean? What does it mean to, fundamentally be an enterprise? And these are questions that people don't really want to have to go back and go to school and answer again, but they're going to have to. I mentioned coaches earlier, all of a sudden everyone is now a coach. And I think there's a lot of, I guess people are asking questions around, they'll go to a workshop, say with the Future Laboratory, and then they'll come out of it going, yes, I told Chris and Martin and the team where we're going, what we'd like to do, please go and write it up. But then they run off to their coaches or their friends and family and say, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I think that personal problem of being inept or challenged or scared or unfit is something that needs to be brought out even more.
Yeah.
I think that's the hardest bit. And yeah, that for me is the bit that I'm certainly not set up to do that, but I think it's coming. I think it's coming. And it could be, run down to Equinox now or go and download this app and be mindful, but I think it's more fundamental than that.
To do okay. Well, Tom, last question for you before you turn the tables.
Yes.
But looking back, it's another looking back question, but looking back over the last 20 years of working to help businesses make their future happen, are there any standout landmarks that you can think of where you were involved in that process that you really think back on?
This was obviously the hardest question. This is the hard question because so many memories. I think it relates to my question. I'll ask you in a second, but for me, I think Turbulent Teens was the launch of that, or the preparation and the launch for Turbulent Teens in 2009 and then 10 was, I think, a moment where the tables turned on the Future Laboratory. I think we went from being a business that was always provocative and knowing and charismatic and all of our values and forthright, but we sort of led. We led even further, and it became our greatest hit. I think, when you think about the amount of times, I think up until last year, we were still replaying Turbulent Teens as a trend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it was so profound and it was so accurate, and it was so haunting, but incredibly optimistic as a trend. And yet, when you look back at the production of it, it was raw. It was so beat up, and it was so not old-fashioned. It was just so simple, and we kind of put it together. But the feeling and the meaning of it was huge.
Yeah.
So I like the state of it being almost 90s Soho production, but it had this, but it was incredibly foresightful. So that for me was a big moment. And because we played that record so many times, I think we transformed a lot of businesses who didn't just take the Future Laboratory even more seriously, but they I think they realized that this was going to be a hard decade to come, and it was, and it still is. So
yeah. Well, I was going to say we're still kind of living with the residue of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So my question to you.
Yes.
So there are so many trends that have been published over the years. Counting almost 40 briefings and countless forums and many macros and micros and things like that. But as entrepreneurs, and I've known you for many years, there are greatest hits in terms of, as I mentioned, trends. But from a cultural perspective, in terms of TFL culture, You know, you guys are the living, breathing embodiment of that. So what are your greatest hits in terms of moments when you, not the kind of normal business growth moments, but moments when the TfL culture did its best for you and you really thought that was one of our greatest hits as a culture?
That's a great question. I think there are stand-up moments, and some of them, for me, obviously relate to when we've created moments and experiences when things happened. So, I think obviously one would be when we developed Sweet Shop, as you know, the installation which we first created at what were then our new offices at Elder Street. And we tried to create a living embodiment of what we thought the future of retail would look like, knowing that we didn't actually have the technology at our fingertips because it hadn't been created to deliver what we wanted to as an experience. So we had to shortcut that and create a theatrical version of what we thought that could or should feel like. And then the penny dropping that within that sat some very interesting matrices or algorithms, call them what you like, about how we could start to identify consumer behavior and consumer mindsets and consumer characteristics, which actually could create a very interesting model that could help you to split down what, and up until that point, was still very basic demographics in terms of how people would divide their customer into maybe, say, 3 subsets or 6 if you were lucky. And even just by doing it almost on the back of a napkin with Sweet Shop, we created 27. And there was just the sudden realization that actually this could become, through a digitized system, even more profound than just literally the thing that we were almost doing it like with the shuffling a deck of cards. So that for me was a hugely interesting moment, somewhat, I think, marred by the fact that I still don't think consumers, brands have recognized the weight of what sits behind that as an opportunity. So that would be definitely one for me. I think on a more specific thing around future laboratory culture, I think Strange Days, which we did at the Tate Tanks, was a bit of a turning point, because again, it was about this midpoint in looking at the turbulent teens and about, I think, giving a very definite view of where we felt that was going. But it was also, as you remember, it was a kind of big deal. It was one of our largest sort of production kind of things that we did in terms of creating content and creating an experience for our guests. But then I just think there have been other moments with our Life Science Network evenings where we've just brought something to life for a group of people who have just suddenly been able to experience developments in neuroscience in a way that they never would have encountered before, with these amazing moments. And I think it's things like that you know, I think the team have always managed to pull off really brilliantly.
To do with, yeah. I think, Tom, because you will recognize this, I think it's the culture of business, because I'm thinking about you know, a lot of the time with the business, you're talking about product, you're talking about service, you're talking about delivery. And I think the core value of TfL, or of what we did and do, is culture. So you're not really telling people, you're showing them. So they came to the building. The reason, as you know, we chose a place to locate our business in that was a particular, you know, kind of style. You built gardens, you built rooms that were slightly, you know, retro. They looked at the past and that. You're always trying to ask questions about time and about experience and about immersion and about showing. And I think that has been a core value that people have taken without really seeing it. But when you ask them about Future Lab, we went to a great event. We had a great experience. Gosh, we remember this. And they're always talking about a thing that happened, like an immersive thing. And my question is, and I guess this is like where I'm going. So if we don't need to be in our office for these things, this is my thing about the why. What is it that will make businesses special going forward? And I really still think there's a question about how culture is transmitted without presence. Because I think while we can all sit on Zoom, it's very difficult to learn the realities of somebody's life from Zoom. If you think about diversity and inclusion, I'm not sure that Zoom would be able to carry the full benefit and consequences of diversity and inclusion without being there and seeing how a trans person, you know, is not just a normal but everyday part of our culture, because without being there, it's impossible to demonstrate that. Everything just seems to be an exception rather than the rule. And then the other bit is about cultural productivity, creativity. How does presence boost cultural creativity, boosts creativity in itself, and boosts collaboration? So I think that what in the next phase of Future Laboratory will certainly be like the last phase, in that we will go back to looking at culture again, looking at how we define culture in this new extraordinary, I'm not going to call it the new normal because it's such an appalling word, that, you know, we want to go back to where we were before with a bit of a twist, really. Okay, that's not a good way to do the future. So I think that the things that we have created will be challenged, but I think the core value, and culture to me is a value, it's not an add-on. And I think for a lot of businesses moving forward, the why will be, well, why should I come to your building? How is it going to enhance me personally? How is it going to develop me emotionally? Will it make a difference to me spiritually or creatively? Yes, it does. Well, fuck, I'm coming. That's why we go to, you know, a mountain. It's why we go to a great lake, why we sit by a beautiful sea. It's not to boost our productivity. It's to boost our cultural values. And I think increasingly that's the reason for the business to exist, because that's will generate profit. So I think that the bits that I'm curious about in the future are probably the things we created by default, but we will now just have to build in as a core and question the why we do it and the how we do it and the benefit to not just the team, because I think people always, everybody's focused on the team now. I go, well, look, okay, a business doesn't exist for its team, whether we like it or not. A business exists for its contribution to other people and how that then benefits a team. So I think we now need to look at what is it we're trying to do for customers. This is, I think, every business. What is it they're trying to do and how they do that? But the why suddenly becomes important, not so much the what, which I think is what a lot of people concentrate on. Chris is staring at me now and kicking me under the table.
Oh, very good. We've run out of time.
Yeah, no, we'll tell you that.
Lovely to see you.
See you.
Love to see you. Big love. Bye.
Take care. Love to everyone. Bye.
Bye.
That sounded really well.